If you have any doubts early on, you're probably better off letting the candidate go. And we've said this. Joel Spolsky, who was one of the Trello founders, has a whole book about this, and it's in there. If there's any doubt, like it's probably for a good reason, and you really want candidates who blow you away. Those are the people
Hmm.
you want to hire. Okay.
Okay. Hey, Brian.
Hi. So let's talk about our hiring process because
We're working with like lots of different recruiters and
yep.
job boards and all the things. And one of the recruiters or one of the services told me that our hiring process was like the most thoughtful that they'd ever seen. So let's talk about it. What did
Okay.
that look like? You were in
Yeah,
charge
I
of the
mean,
hiring process.
there's so much. I think the first thing that we did that was really good is that we had a process, right? We sat down and
Mm.
wrote out a document, and then we also solicited from our team what a good hiring process should be. And
Hmm.
one of the engineers on our team, Travis, wrote a big document and had a bunch of steps in it. And we had done, as founders, we had our own idea about what that process would look like. And we did some back and forth to end up with something that ultimately was not too many steps. We wanted to have an
Hmm.
efficient process, right? Which one thing is we didn't talk to one member of our team in our process, which was a concession we made to make the process faster.
Yeah. Well,
Kind
let's
of,
set some context. How big is the
yeah.
team? What role are we hiring for? What is it remote? Is it in an office? What's the context?
Yeah, so the context is we're a team of six. We're two senior engineers, one senior UX designer, three founders, and our intention was to hire a seventh teammate, a third engineer. We're fully remote. We emphasize asynchronous work. We travel for offsites, but for the most part, this role is highly autonomous. We want someone who can do a lot. It's not just about being a craftsperson. We want a product thinker. We want someone who's able to participate in the strategic conversations that we have. It's a really special kind of developer, so we had to have a really stringent process.
And then what's your role in this?
So my role in the process was owning the whole thing, which just means for us being the designated responsible person to make sure that it happened. And then actually within the process, that means that if we had divergent thinking about should we do X or Y, I would make the calls. And then
Hmm.
actually like within it, I did the top of the hiring funnel, which means I looked at all the resumes, I did all the
Hmm.
initial screens. I think I had the bulk of the initial intake conversations with the recruiters, like all the first line of review.
Okay. And we're a startup, obviously. We got to move quickly, but at the same time, like at a startup, every single person has to make such a big impact. We got to get it right. Let's like let's start at the beginning of how do you design the process and what even is the process? We keep talking about the process like it's a capital P process. What does that actually mean? Why isn't the hire just, hey, talk to the founders, talk to the engineers, that's it? Technical review. What is it?
In some sense, it is. I think you need to know who is asking what, so what your criteria are. So, for example, in the intake, I wanted to talk to individual engineers to understand their startup experience, or if they didn't have any startup experience, why they thought that was a good idea. Because, as we know, working in an early stage company is so different than working in a big company. There's a lot of
Yeah.
different challenges.
Hmm.
Um,
Different is one
and
word.
different is one word, special challenges. I'm I think one of the things we realized during the course of our process was we wanted people who were really like excited to be here. It's like they were here for
Hmm.
the right reasons, right? So it's like
Yeah.
our company Hoop is in productivity, we're in AI, and I think that's really exciting. But you need to have
Hmm.
candidates who are like nerding out about that, who are excited
Yeah.
about that, who want to be here for that. So it's all
Hmm.
like right place, right reasons. Are you psyched for a remote company? Are you psyched for a startup? Are you psyched for
Hmm.
AI and productivity? And having spoken to, I don't know, 70 whatever candidates from that's after we winnowed down from resume screen. I think you can tell pretty quickly if there's like energy for the space that you're in.
Mm. Okay. So I'm curious. One thing that I really like about our process and in general how I have hired previously is that it's less about talking about stuff or talking about your background and more about actually mimicking what a person does in their job. And we did that in a few interesting ways specific to how we work with asynchronous work. So why don't do you want to maybe talk through the different stages of the process?
Yeah. So I'll talk about the stages and then what the point was. I think, let's see. So we have a document that is called Senior Full Stack Engineer Interview Process. There is a thing, an artifact that we debated about and finalized as a team. So we all literally were on the same page about what the process was.
This is a Notion.
So there's a Notion document. It's got lots of comments and emoji, and there's
I
like,
think you had I think you had shared it in Slack. You made a draft. You were like, this is what I'm thinking for the process. Let me know your thoughts by the end of the day tomorrow or something like that.
It's even better than that. So I had done one and I was writing one, and then Travis on our team had also done one. So we actually had two things. So we ended up with the one idea, and then we met in the middle. And then those are all obviously sitting in our Notion, and we're talking about them in a meeting or in Slack or both. And what was great about Travis's page that we incorporated into the process was a set of what are the things we care about for this candidate. So I'll just go through those. Yeah. We called it seed stage fire, but like an interest in being at the early stage, because as we said, it's a very different kind of experience than being in a big company or working in an office. We cared a lot about attention to detail. We cared a lot about taking ownership of your work. And this kind of goes back to that autonomy and working in an asynchronous environment. We care a lot about technical experience and skill. Like, we really need people who are first and foremost top notch in their craft. We looked at the ability and familiarity with async remote collaboration. Like, how do you work when your team is scattered all over the US and shares some overlapping hours, but isn't always online at the same time? And then last, but certainly not least, is talked about and cared about our values as an organization from the beginning. So we wanted to make sure that values were front and center with what we interviewed for. So with all those criteria in mind, when we went and tried to build out interview steps, we wanted to make sure, okay, this interview is testing for this criteria. So we had a mapping of steps to criteria. Does it make sense to you? Yeah, it is a lot.
I mean, this is a lot. I'm hearing it. I'm like, these people are extra, but
they are
obviously.
they're super extra. I do think with this stuff, the more you front load it, you have this big thing before, and then once you get into execution, it starts to click. But we are super intentional, I think, and thoughtful.
I mean, that's one of our values.
It is definitely one of our values.
Yeah. Okay. So how does that, practically speaking, that's a lot of words. What does that mean? You're an applicant. What does it look like?
So step one, we have a public facing page. We worked with some contingency recruiters. We're pinging our network. So we have a publicly facing job description
Which
where
is actually,
we solicit.
It was our blog post. And what I liked about that was that we had put a photo, like a team photo on it. So you already knew getting into it that it was a team of 6 people, and it felt, I don't know, it felt on brand.
Yeah, I love the blog post. I loved having our page. We also included 2 screening questions. So we asked people how they felt about AI and the future of work, and we asked people about a front end feature they've worked on that lacked super specific design guidance. And all that was really helpful, because in the first instance, a lot of candidates don't read the JD carefully, and they don't answer the questions, and they don't give you. And I asked for a resume, and I asked for a LinkedIn. Maybe you would get, the questions wouldn't get answered, and that kind of gives you a little bit of a view into attention to detail. Do people
Which is
read?
One of the things that we're
Which
testing
is one of the
for.
criteria. Yeah, absolutely. So in some sense, you get screening right off the bat from that. Do people write in answer the questions? And it didn't mean the answers didn't have to be 2,000 characters. They could be shortish. They could be longer. Yeah. You could just tell, did the person care about this answer, or did they just dash it off?
So 2 things. Sorry, I was going to say, just for context, this is at the bottom of our job description. We're to apply, email your resume and LinkedIn and answer these two questions. That was like
Yeah.
literally the first step of the process.
And it's at the bottom. So you have to
Yeah.
get to the bottom
You
of the
have to get
page.
there. Yeah.
And that's intentional, right? We want to make sure
Mm-hmm.
that people are, when you're applying for a job at Hoop, it's not one job out of 782 jobs you're applying for. We want people who are picking Hoop for a reason. This is, I
Yes.
want to work at a startup. I want to work at an AI company. I'm being very thoughtful about my next career move, as well as you should be, because it's a
Mm-hmm.
huge commitment of your own time and energy and
Yeah.
resources. Again, we're back to the sort of the criteria. Is this, and values? Is this an attention to detail thing? Is this like a seed stage fire? Is
Yeah.
this intentionality? Like all of this stuff, even from the very first submission, is wrapped up in our values and our hiring criteria.
I think it's really interesting to think about, and we'll get to the next step in a sec, but like just that every interaction with us is a sort of like a brand moment for the candidate and part of how they're evaluating us. But it's the same way that we're evaluating candidates. And I gotta say, after you see a handful of responses, it's pretty interesting to see how many people are using like Chat GPT to answer
Oh yeah.
questions like this. And it's so obvious. Don't do that. Like, it's
Don't do
really
that.
freaking obvious. Yeah.
Don't do that. And part of it, like our question about AI in the future of work was really like generic. So maybe an AI response there is harder to tell. But if I'm asking you to tell me about a story where you
Yeah.
worked on something and you didn't have design guidance, like you should probably give that one some thought and write something
Yeah.
down that you think that
Yeah.
that is real. And yeah,
Yeah.
I would say 20% of candidates are using, the ones that answer the questions at all are using
Yeah.
some kind of AI to generate responses, and it's very obvious.
Okay. So you get a person, I'm a candidate, I submit, I answer the questions, I give you my LinkedIn, my resume. Then what
hmm
happens?
So then the first thing we did was the founder screen one. So this is an interview, a short 30-minute interview with me. My goal was everyone who wrote in, I got back to them within 24 hours, more or less. So we would get back, review resume, review responses, and then do a Calendly link for founder screen one. And usually it was relatively quick, sometimes the next day. And founder screen one was about, is there evidence of that seed stage interest? Is there evidence of ownership? And is there some kind of a value alignment, which is a lot. I found myself
Hmm.
looking for or talking about experience and at different jobs. I talked about or tried to get my way into whether the person was a strategic thinker. And within 30 minutes, you actually could get a pretty good feeling, I think, about whether the person should move on.
Hmm.
Also, I think it's really important in screening to talk about equity, comp, benefits. There's never really a good time to talk about that. It's always
Hmm.
awkward. But I think
Yeah.
you just have to put out where you're at, because the worst thing that happen is you get far along in a process and you find out something is really important to a candidate that you don't have or you don't offer, and then you
Yeah.
just wasted like 6 steps in your process.
Yeah. Great point. So
So
if
that was
someone
so
passes that, what happens?
Yep. So that's founder one. If you get past that, we do a take home, which is a little bit, I don't know how normal a take home is, but we did a take home. So the take home was a 1 to 3 hour assignment. You get a design file from us, and then we ask you to do a React set of components, like a little settings page for a web app. And one of the neat things that we added late on in our thinking was we actually had the candidates present their work on a Loom. So they would record a kind of an overview, 5 minutes or less. And that was
Hmm.
great. We use Loom all the time. We love recordings and things like that help us save time and not need to wait for the next day to have a meeting. And the Loom was also a great way to just, how comfortable is the candidate talking about their work? How comfortable are they presenting? So all
Yeah.
that stuff was awesome. So that was great. And then that was the take home portion.
Okay, so that part is testing their technical abilities, first of all, but also their ability to work independently, because this sort of takes the place of some sort of a pair coding or a coding exercise. And we wanted to do that because there's so much independent work going on in the way that we work, specifically for this role and in the culture of the company. And then the Loom was also demonstrating whether the candidate could function and work in an environment like ours. If you are uncomfortable recording a Loom demo, you're probably not going to be a culture fit at Hoop.
Yeah.
So I think that was great.
Totally. And then the one other thing there is because it was a front end exercise, it got at that attention to detail criteria. It was like,
which
do
was
you
important for
have,
this role.
which super important, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
do you have that product eye for color and padding and all those other things? So that was a
Okay.
big part of it.
All right. So that
Uh,
person, let's say they make it through that gauntlet. And at this point, it seems like a lot, but if I'm sitting here as the candidate, I've only basically had a 30-minute phone call after submitting my resume, answering two questions. I've had a 30-minute phone call, and now I've had this like 1 2 hour, oh gosh, I have the thing. I need to turn that off. The take home. So we're only
right.
really like maybe 2 hours into the process, but on our end, if a candidate is making it this far, they're doing better than 90% of the other candidates.
Yeah, that's right. So if you get past resume screen, you're already one and four. So only 25% made it past resume screen to
Hmm.
founder screen one. And then to get past the take home, it was like 5% made it past the take home. And then subsequent interviews were either even lower than that. There were some
Okay.
really big winnowing stages fairly early on in our process, which is what we
Yeah.
wanted because
Yeah.
in part, as a small team, we're trying to protect engineering time. So we're trying to
Yep.
keep the engineering stuff to the very end.
Exactly. Yeah, I was going to say, we at this point, the only engineers that have been involved have been Brad looking at and grading the Loom portion of and the coding portion of the exercise, which takes 5 minutes of his time. So
Yeah.
so far,
And
we're
the,
doing a good job.
and the nice thing about that is everybody can see the loom. So it's not just
Yeah.
just Brad, but also because it's code review, it's not scheduling. So Brad can look
Yes,
at it on his
exactly.
time and
Async.
then get back to you. And so we can get like a 12-hour turnaround on those, which is
Async.
great.
Yeah.
Async is great.
All right. So let's power through the rest of them.
Power the rest. So the next two are pretty straightforward. So the next two are founder screens with the other two founders. You, Stella, would do founder screen two, which was a values focused 30-minute conversation. And
Yes.
then past the values, we would get to Justin. Justin
Hmm.
would be a 60-minute product engineering and design fluency focused interview. So that one
Hmm.
is looking at attention to detail, it's looking at craft, and it's looking at ownership over your work. So that was
Hmm.
those two pieces. And interestingly, one thing we learned is that often, I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but for us, if one founder passed a candidate in, I think, almost every circumstance except for one, all the
Yes.
founders would say yes to a candidate, which is why we put the take home earlier,
Yes.
because we knew if you got past the take home, you were probably going to make it through to the sort of later staged portion, the post founder portion of the interview.
Yeah. Okay. And then after that, they have, at that point, it's 30 minutes with me. We're talking about values. Then we talk product craft with Justin for an hour. And then it's the big one,
Then it's the big one. So now
the
you're in
final step.
the final step, which
Dun,
initially
dun,
was 90
dun.
minutes and later grew to a 2-hour whopping session. So this we called the technical interview slash technical conversation. So this was a 60-minute technical pair programming exercise with both of our engineers, Travis and Brad, followed immediately by a 60-minute engineering conversation that has a set format. And this is all about like technical craft, ownership, attention to detail. If candidates got this far, this was actually still a very difficult to pass portion, especially the technical piece. And for the most part, this is where, if you made it, this is where we saw people drop. And then, but that was ultimately our last step. So we're talking,
Yes.
I don't know, for those of us keeping score, it's about 6 steps if you include the initial contact as a step. So initial contact, founder
Hmm.
screen 1, take home
Hmm.
assignment, founder screen
Hmm.
2, 3, and then the
Hmm.
technical thing,
Yeah. Which
or the
I think
human.
honestly, it's not that much. If you were going to be interviewing, I shouldn't say it's not that much, it's a lot, but it is in line with, if I think back to any other job that I've interviewed for, usually what happens is that it is like in person for 2 days or something. Or I've definitely had 8 9 step interview processes before. I think maybe because I tend to work with smaller companies and where every person is so important. I think the other important thing is like the candidate is getting to know the company and whether they're a culture fit at this time. Are they enjoying these things? Are they enjoying the exercise? And so ultimately, I think that it's funny because at the end we were like so into trusting the process. And I think the process really did work, even though maybe
Yeah.
the recruiters we were working with would wanted to kill us. So let's talk about that super quickly just to round it out. I
Yeah.
think the person that we hired, so we had lots of different streams for finding candidates. I think that's the hardest part, right? The top of the funnel.
Yeah.
Well, all of it is hard, but so what are some things that we did to get candidates in and ultimately what ended up being the most fruitful?
Yeah, sourcing is really hard. I do think investing in the process is super important because this is the most important thing. Like having
The
great people
people,
is
the
so
right people.
critical. End to end, also just as a data point, we hired the candidate that made it through. It took a little bit more, but roughly 3 weeks to go through this whole thing. And a lot of that is scheduling. It's just like
Yeah.
getting things to work because calendars are tricky. So I would love it if that were 2 weeks, obviously. But at the same
Yeah.
time, I felt like we were
Yeah.
constantly
And we
trying
don't
to.
have a recruiter. We're the recruiters. We're doing
Yeah,
everything.
totally,
Mostly
totally.
you.
And that's well, all of us. And that's
Yeah.
intentional, right? Like we wanted
Yes.
to be doing this ourselves. In terms of how we sourced, we had a lot of things. I think ultimately at the end of the day, the most valuable is just having a presence online. Stella, you do a ton, which is great. So we're like known and out there. Hoop has done a lot of brand work. We have tried to create a presence individually as well, which is super useful in recruiting. Your
So
network
useful.
and then the second order network are incredibly valuable sources, but they're super finite. So you work with contingency recruiters. We offered a hiring bounty on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
which was one idea. We used the Hacker News hiring thread, and that generated a
Hmm.
lot of applications, some of which were very good.
So
So
hang
that
on,
was
that's
great.
just so if for folks who don't know, on the first of the month, Hacker News has a who's hiring thread, and it's a very popular spot. Every time that I've hired at startups, we've always been posting and looking at who is looking from that.
Yeah, and it's great. That's you get some stuff that maybe isn't ideal, but you do get some quality candidates from there as well. So I
Hmm.
would definitely do that again.
And
But
it's
yeah,
free.
it's free. You just have to
Yeah,
post on that day. So it's
yeah.
great.
We also had job boards. We posted on a couple
Yep.
of remote, I think We Work Remotely is one that we posted on. We also posted on Remotive. I don't know. How did you feel about the quality of candidates from,
It was okay. We asked our angels,
that's true, our
investors,
angel
which is
investors?
great. We pinged our individual networks, not just like the LinkedIn network, but also people we know. We texted around and say, hey, anybody who's looking. It's you're trying to have as many, not to do a sports metaphor, sorry.
Oh
You're
God.
trying to have as many at bats as possible here. So I think sourcing candidates is you never really know where someone amazing is going to come from. So the
Yeah,
more
exactly.
things you have going, the better.
Okay, so just to close this out, what do you think are your top three learnings? This is obviously not our first time hiring. What are your top three learnings from this time around?
I think without a doubt, the most important thing in my mind is you want to let a lot of candidates through, but the more you go on in the process, you realize how high a bar you're holding. If you have any doubts early on, you're probably better off letting the candidate go. And we've said this. Joel Spolsky, who was one of the Trello founders, has a whole book about this, and it's in there. If there's any doubt, like it's probably for a good reason, and you really want candidates who blow you away. Those are the
Hmm.
people you want to hire. I would even distill it just to that. That is like absolutely critical. I think from a process point of view, getting the team together and to spend time to understand what you are asking for at each stage is really important. So that's in our process document. And then the third thing I think is having a really tight SLA to yourself, like a service level agreement where you say, I'm going to get back to candidates within 24 hours. I'm going to answer every candidate who writes in, I'm going to email them back. Even if we're
Hmm.
a decline, I'm going to let them
Hmm.
know that they were a decline. And one
Yeah.
candidate wrote me back and was like, "Oh my god, like nobody writes me back." I'm like, "Come on, if someone's going to take the time to
Yeah.
apply and to show interest in what you're up to, I think the
Hmm.
minimum you should do is write back." So I think
Yes.
those are some of the things.
Yeah, that reminds me of something one of our old coworkers used to say, who used to run recruiting at Trello, is that again, every point is a experience. Even if someone is applying to work with you today, and it doesn't work out today, you don't know, like 2 years from now, they're going to walk away with a perception of your company. And
Yeah.
so making sure that you are very thoughtful and treat people the way you'd want to be treated, I think is huge. Even at a startup when you don't have time.
Yeah.
There's no
I
time
mean,
for anything.
there,
There is
you
time
got
to be a human.
you got to make time to be a
Yeah.
human because it's
Yes.
humans on both sides, and it's
Yeah,
looking for a
exactly.
job is really tough.
It's
So,
horrible.
we
Yeah.
want to do our best to
Empathy.
make it humane. Yeah, exactly. It's a
Exactly.
value.
It is one of our values. It all comes back to the values, and empathy is a big part of what we do at Hoop. So, congratulations, Brian.
Congratulations, Stella. We hired someone.
We
We made
hired
it.
someone. Yay.
Woohoo! All right.
Okay.